Shame is one of the most painful of all human emotions, and one of the most misunderstood. We use the word loosely, often interchangeably with guilt, but they are very different experiences. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. Guilt is about a behavior. Shame is about an identity. That distinction matters enormously because shame targets the self at its core. When you feel guilty, you want to repair. When you feel ashamed, you want to disappear. Shame collapses the distance between what you did and who you are. And in that collapse, something essential feels exposed and condemned. Shame is not innate, it is learned, absorbed from the environments we grow up in, particularly early relationships. When a child's needs, emotions, or identity are consistently met with rejection, contempt, or silence, shame is the result. The message received, whether spoken or implied, is, there is something fundamentally wrong with you. This can happen through overt criticism or abuse, but it can also happen through subtler dynamics. Conditional love, perfectionist expectations, emotional unavailability, or belonging to a culture that assigns shame to certain identities or experiences. Whatever its origin, shame tends to go underground, where it operates quietly, shaping behavior and self-perception from below the surface of awareness. Shame rarely arrives alone. It tends to spiral. It begins with a triggering event, a perceived failure, rejection, embarrassment, or exposure. The initial feeling of shame is followed almost immediately by secondary responses: withdrawal, self-attack, or defense. You hide the thing you feel ashamed of. You attack yourself before anyone else can. Or you defend against the shame by projecting, becoming aggressive, dismissive, or blaming of others. These secondary responses all share the same purpose: to get away from the unbearable feeling of being seen as fundamentally flawed. The spiral can move fast, and the secondary responses, the hiding, the self-attack, the defense, often create new problems of their own. Brené Brown's research on shame identified one of its most consistent features. It needs secrecy to survive. Shame tells you that if anyone really knew, saw the thing you're hiding, understood the full extent of what you believe about yourself, they would reject you. So you keep it hidden. And in the hiding, the shame grows. It becomes larger in the dark than it ever would be in the light. Brown's work shows that empathy is the antidote to shame. The experience of sharing something painful and being met with understanding rather than judgment. This is also why self-compassion is so powerful. It offers that empathic response from the inside. Subscribe to this channel for more on navigating difficult emotions. We cover this every week. Where shame says, I am uniquely, irreparably flawed, self-compassion says, I am human like everyone else. That shift from isolation to common humanity is precisely what shame most needs. Research by Neff and colleagues shows that self-compassion significantly reduces shame, particularly because it activates the brain's soothing system rather than its threat system. Shame keeps the threat system activated, which perpetuates the spiral. Self-compassion interrupts it. Importantly, self-compassion is not the same as excuse-making or avoiding accountability. It is possible and necessary to take responsibility for your actions, while also extending kindness to yourself. Accountability without shame is actually more effective than accountability driven by shame. One of the most powerful things you can do with shame is name it, first to yourself and eventually selectively to someone you trust. Naming shame breaks the secrecy it relies on. It shifts the experience from something that defines you to something that happened to you, a painful experience, not an identity. This doesn't mean disclosing everything to everyone. Shame sharing requires a safe relationship, someone who will receive what you share with empathy, not judgment, not unsolicited advice, and not their own discomfort. The experience of being seen and still found acceptable is one of the most healing things available to us. It is also something you can begin to offer yourself through the practice of self-compassion. When shame shows up, there are several evidence-based practices that help. Pause and name it. Saying, "I feel ashamed right now," shifts you from being inside the experience to observing it. Ground in the body. Shame often creates a physical sensation. Chest tightening, face flushing, stomach dropping. Placing a hand on your chest and breathing slows the spiral. Invoke common humanity. Remind yourself that shame is a universal human experience. You are not uniquely flawed. Write a compassionate letter. Write to yourself from the perspective of someone who knows your full story and loves you anyway. Over time, these practices create new neural pathways, a more available route to kindness when shame arrives. Shame is an experience. It is not an identity. You are not the things you feel ashamed of. You are the whole, complicated, worthy person who has had those experiences. The shame you carry often has its roots in messages received before you were old enough to evaluate them critically. Messages about your worth, your acceptability, your right to take up space. Those messages were not truth. They were someone else's limitations, their own unprocessed pain, the particular failures of particular people or systems. You absorbed them because you had no choice, but you are no longer that child, and you have more choice now. Self-compassion doesn't erase shame, but it offers something shame never could: the experience of being fully seen and still found acceptable. That is where healing begins.